Okay, you will hand this in tomorrow for an assignment grade. There's no reason why these should not be watched and why they should not be completed, okay? There's no problems on your own. Your job's to take notes and process the information. You will have a practice assignment on it tomorrow because a lot of people were confused when we did it on Tuesday. Now, if I have radicals and there's no addition or subtraction operator in sight, and I have to simplify an expression, I'm going to use my properties of exponents. But first thing you need to do, you're going to make one parentheses, and you need to identify what degree your radicals are. If there's not anything there, they are 2. They're square roots. So that means your parentheses now, instead of thinking of it in terms of radicals, you're going to think of it in terms of a rational exponent. Since it's 2, it's to the 1/2 power. If it's 3, it's to the 1/3. Now circle underneath those roots. And we're going to multiply 8 by 2. And for the x's, we add the powers. 2 plus 2 is 4. Now, my base is, now I treat it like an exponential property thing. I've got 16 times x. 16 is to the first, x is to the fourth. So 1 times 1/2 is 1/2. Then 4 times 1/2 is 2, since half of 4 is 2. Now circle your exponents. The exponent that is not a fraction, by the way, if you have any negatives, they have to switch sides. It's not going to happen here today. Okay, and you switch them not on here. You need this to read for a radical. Okay, x is second. That carries over because it's not a fraction. So I can forget that. Now let's look at the fraction. First, I want to cross out the 2, which I'm allowed to do as long as I make a radical with a 2 in the index. And then inside I put 16 to the first power. Now, simplify what you can. Outside you got x second, can't simplify that. And then when I get to my radical, I make my radical. Is there any letters inside the radical? No. If there are, you put them over here. But there's not. So I need to simplify the number that's in the radical. 16 to the first is 16, okay? Now, you're on the square root list. Pull 16's right there. Cha-ching. Put equals 4. When that happens, the 4 goes outside the radical at the beginning of the problem, of the expression. And you're like, what do I put in the radical? Nothing. It's empty, so we don't need it. So the answer is 4x to the second power. Okay. Now the radicals have a 3, so it's going to be to the 1/3 power. Just look inside. We'll talk about the outside in a bit. I can take 9 times 24, 216. I can also still tell on the y's, I take y to the second times y to the first. You add 2 plus 1, that's 3. Now about that 5, you just place 5 in front of the parentheses. It is not in the parentheses. So my bases are 5 times 216 times y. The 5 does not get multiplied. It is not in the parentheses. We just put the first power on the 5. 216, 1 times 1/3 is 1/3. Y, 3 times 1/3 is 1. Now, look at your exponents. The ones that are whole, don't have a fraction, we just transfer those over. So 5 to the first and y to the first. I can forget about those. Now look at the fraction. You make a cubed root, and inside it you put 216 to the first power. So 5 to the first is 5, y to the first is y, and then I make my radical. I don't have any variables in the radical that I bring over, so I go down and simplify the cubed root of 216 to the first. 216 to the first is 216. Now you're not going to look at that list. It's a cubed root. And 216 is on here, it equals 6. Now I'm going to repeat that again. When that happens and it equals a number, a whole number right away, you don't put that in the radical, you put it in front of the expression. And the radical's empty, means we don't need it. Now, you need to take 6 times 5, that's 30. See up here there's just a 4, but when there's two numbers in front, you need to multiply those 30y. Okay, first rewrite that in radical form to the 1/4 power. 81 times 32, going to be a pretty sizable product. 2,592, trust the process, my man. Then x, well, we got a 5 and a 3, that would add to x to the 8th. And then as far as y goes, because that's also got a 4 and a 1, that makes a y to the 5th. Now those are done. Now the 2's outside need to be multiplied. 2 times 2 is 4. So what do I got? I got a 4. I got a 2,592. I got an x and I got a y. So 4 factors. The 1 does not get multiplied by 1/4. It is outside the parentheses, so it's 1. 1 times 1/4 is 1/4. X, what's 8 times 1/4? That's 2, okay? Let's take 5 times 1/4, see what happens there. That's a mixed number, that's good, 1 and 1/4. Now when I'm circling my exponents, I've got a 1, a 1/4, a 2, and a 1 and 1/4 that need to be kept separate. So the powers here, here, and here that are not fractions, I bring them over. So I have 4 to the first, times x to the second, times y to the first. Those can all be ditched then. Now these fractions, you cross out the bottoms, and I just crossed out the same number, so I make 1/4 root. And inside I put 2,592 to the first times y to the first, because the first is on top of the fraction. Now simplify the outside. 4 to the first is 4. X to the second can't be simplified. Y to the first is y. Okay, now I make my radical. If there's a variable inside, simplify it. Y to the first should just be y. But the number inside, I take down here. This process works every time if you trust it and aren't too lazy to write up the steps. To the first, it'd just be the same thing. Now, we're not as fortunate. I don't see that on here, okay? So I would start dividing into the 2,592, attempting to write it into 2 separate 4th roots. Fail. 1,296, oh, I got it, it's 2. Now, why do we divide by that? Because that has an equal. It's equal as 6. Now, I'm going to say another thing 3 times. The 6 goes in front of the expression. The 2 goes inside the radical. The 6 goes in front of the expression. The 2 goes inside the radical. The 6 goes in front of the expression. The 2 goes inside the radical. Okay, now, when I write my answer, I've got the radical 4 with 2y. That's set. Outside, I take 6 times 4, that's 24. X times x to the second times y. Bam. Okay, my next problem. We got radical 3's, okay? So rewrite those to the 1/3, and I take 6 times 16, 96. Nothing outside. So I got a base of 96. It's going to the 1/3 power. 1 times 1/3 is 1/3. Okay, the only power I have is a fraction. So I ditch the 3, make a cubed root out of it, put 96 to the first. Now I don't have anything outside, so I make my radical 3. I don't have any variables, so I simplify the number that's inside. Get rid of that first now. Now you're doing cube roots. 96 ain't here, so I need to divide and rewrite it as two separate cubed roots. 96 divided by 64, 96 divided by 27, 96 divided by 8, cha-ching. So I got 8 and 12. So that becomes 2. Now, I'll repeat this 3 times. 2 goes on the outside in front of the expression. 12 goes on the inside, and I'm there. I have 2 with a radical 3 over 12. Now, I don't see any addition or subtraction operators, so we're going with this. Okay, so I make an entire parentheses that's to the 1/2 power. Now, here's what you do. 56 divided by 7 is 8. Perfect division. Now I've also got x on top and bottom, so I put x and I'm going to take 5 minus 1. That would be to the 4th. Now I've also got y. 5 minus 1 to the 4th. Now I'm where I need to be. So 8, don't take 8 times a half. You put a 1 and write down 8x and y, and it's 1 times 1/2, which is 1/2. 14 times 1/2 is 7 whole. 4 times 1/2 is 2. So here are my powers. The ones that are not fractions I transfer over. X to the 7th, y to the 2nd. Now, the fraction, I make a square root, put 8 inside, it would be 8 to the 1st. Now outside, simplify, well, x to the 7th can't be simplified, y to the 2nd can't be simplified. How about the square root? Well, there's no letters inside. I need to come down here and simplify what is on the inside. It's 8. No, you don't put equals 2. It's a square root, so go to the right list, okay? So 8. Not here, so I divide. 8 divided by 4 is 2. So you write 4 and 2. So that becomes 2. And we put that 2 there goes to the front. That 2 there is inside the radical. So I got the radical 2 with 2, and I've just got a 2 times an x to the 7th times a y to the 2nd. Okay, next problem. Make a parentheses to the 1/4 power, because it's a 4 radical. Now inside you want to divide. You have 162 divided by 2. That would be 81. Now I've got x to the 4th. There's no x on the bottom, so it's just x to the 4th. It'd be like 4 minus 0. Now there's not a y on top. Instead there's just a lone y on bottom, so I underline that and put y to the 8th since there's not a y up top. So I'm going to have two bases in the numerator, 81 times x, and then a base in the denominator with y. Everything's in parentheses, so every power I have has to be multiplied by a 4th. 1 times 1/4 is 1/4. 4 times 1/4 is 1 whole. Then 8 times 1/4 is 2. Okay. Now, the variables with the whole powers. 1 and 2 and 1/4. These two here I just bring over. X to the 1st, but make sure the y to the 2nd's in the denominator. Now, to get my fraction, I make a 4th root. I put 81 inside to the 1st power. First, because there's a 1 on top. Now simplify the outsides. X to the 1st, you could put x. Y to the 2nd would stay to the 2nd. I'll put my radical 4. Is there any letters or variables inside? Nope. So simplify the number that's inside. 81 to the 1st is 81. So the 4th root of 81 is 3. 3 equals 3 on the button. Once again, that goes in the front, not in the radical. So the radical's empty, ditch it. So your answer is 3 times x over y to the 2nd. Once again, if you have a y on the bottom, you need to place it on bottom and carry it over on the bottom. Okay, last one. There's a little hook to this one. Remember, these are 2's if you don't have them. No problem here. If you get a decimal when you divide, here's what you do. You put 20 over 45. Now, if you get a multiplication chart, what row are those both in? They're in the 5th row together, so divide them each by 5, much like when you do figure out a GCF. So that's going to be 4/9, okay? So I put 4/9. So if it doesn't divide evenly, see if it reduces. Now, another interesting hook. Let's look at the A's. If I take 1 minus 2, ain't that going to be a negative? Yeah, it is. Your higher exponent's on the bottom. When that happens, put the A on the bottom, and then it's just 2 minus 1. 2 minus 1 is 1. Then you can do normal subtraction. Now the B, if I write a B down, take a 1 minus 3, that's going to be a negative. Okay? 1 minus 3 is negative 2 ohms. So if I put B on the bottom, then I won't have to write the negative 2. I can just go 3 minus 1 and put 2. So your bases are a 4 on top, but then we got 9 times A times B on the bottom. So 1 times 1/2, everything's in parentheses, is 1/2. 1 times 1/2 is 1/2. 1 times 1/2, 1/2. And 2 times 1/2 is going to be 1. Okay, now there's also another kicker to this. Or no, we'll save that for another day. Just do it like normal. B to the first, you transfer that over. That's a whole exponent. Okay, now on top you got a fraction of 2. You can cross those out, but you're going to need to make a square root on top with 4 to the first inside. And also these two, you make a square root on the bottom, and you put 9 to the first times a to the first. Okay, now b to the first is just b. Now your radical 2, you got that here. There's no variable inside. The radical 2 on bottom has an a to the first inside, which should be a. Now simplify the numbers in those radicals. You got the square root of 4 to the first and the square root of 9 to the first. Okay, 4 to the first is 4, 9 to the first is 9. What's square root of 4? It's going to be 2. Square root of 9, 3. Remember, those go outside the radical, so I put a 2 in front on top, because that's where the 4 was. And I put a 3 at the beginning down on the bottom. The radical here is empty, so you can delete it. Here, there's still an a in it. So the answer is 2/3, 2 over 3. And on bottom, I got a times b and a square root of a. Now there's something I did not tell you about the a square root of a, and we'll get to that later, but for now, that's kind of how that shakes out.